Nasal dysfunction is worth more to the medical model than a healthy nose, because if we can't breathe well, we will never sleep well. And if there's no motion of air, we lose the art of breathing, and then we become a CDC statistic. Dr. Karen Parker Davidson is a globally recognized airway clinical nurse specialist for her pioneering contributions to nasal function. As one of only 2 experts worldwide to advance 4-phase rhinometry, she introduced nasal resistance as the 5th vital sign and biomarker in clinical care. Dr. Karen, welcome to the Unfiltered Healing Podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's actually an honor for me. I honestly really don't know, other than probably literally divine orchestration, that I get in contact with some of the most amazing people on my podcast. But I'm so thankful and really excited to be able to take some of your time today, as you are an immense expert in the field of nasal breathing, in the field of airway. And so I'm excited to talk about what we're going to be talking about today. And I knew that you were a big deal in this airway space, but specifically nasal resistance, until you sent me over your bio. And I had no idea how much you really poured into your craft, like an RN, an Air Force and RN, a doctorate, 3 masters, a bachelor's. You're now working on another PhD. I'm going to miss something in there. Author, inventor. I was like, man, I really need to up my game here.
Some people collect cars. I collect degrees. So and I have my people call it an I love me wall. People call it an I love me wall, but I call it I can't believe I did it wall.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that is just like phenomenal. You're a forever student. And I consider myself one too, but I was like, to me, it was like, man, I'm behind here. I need to get going on a few more things. So obviously you are well qualified for our discussion today. So we are excited to learn more about that. But for those of you who may not have heard you, and this is their first kind of exposure of you, this is probably just a little good segue for us doing a little bit of an introduction on yourself, what started you specifically into this, and then maybe a little bit of like that evolution to where you are now.
Yeah. So this has been a 34-year journey. And I always say, don't do the math because it's been a long time. It started back in 1991 when I was in nursing school at UNC Chapel Hill. And we had a nurse extern program. So my first choice was the recovery room or the PACU because I thought that I wanted to be a nurse anesthetist. And if you know me, I could not sit still long enough to pass gas. But I found a home in the recovery room. So I graduated Chapel Hill, went to MUSC as their first ever new graduate nurse, because typically you have to have 2 years of critical care experience with your certification in that field. And they gave me a chance and I loved it. Got my commission in the Air Force as an officer and a flight nurse, critical care nurse as well. So my primary Air Force service code was flight nurse. Secondary was critical care and OR if they felt challenged to really pull me into the OR. I found my way into pharmaceutical sales because I thought when I was working in the recovery room and also, floating in the OR on occasion, I really found a passion in ENT. And then I saw the vendors like, well, that's a cool job, kind of make your own hours and do what you want to do and that freedom. And it was so interesting because at that time, I was here in DC as a travel nurse. So I had kind of found my way across the US and have lived and have been licensed in 7 different states individually. And everyone said nurses can't sell. So I'm like, fine. So I got a master's in administration. So I had a bit of a business background and found my way into the industry in 1997. And in there, I did children's mental health, pursued my master's as a nurse practitioner, and just the highways and the byways in life had a few hairpin turns. But I think the pivotal moment was 2 things: after 9/11 and being deployed and holding a lot of hands of injured soldiers, sailors, and Marines that we were taking them home. But then I found my way in the ENT world in 2002, selling a vagus nerve stimulator. And I think, my most memorable moment for that was teaching Dr. Ben Carson, but how to make sure that the device was working and calibrated. That was a lot of fun. So as you see him on TV is how he is as he's sitting next to you in the OR by the table. And then I went right into ENT. So I did that for about 8 years with Gyrus ENT. And then one of the distributors from Gyrus said, "Hey, come work with me." And what was really interesting, there's a point to this. At that time of those 8 years, I saw over 8,000 ENT cases in the OR and in the offices. And I left that field and I went into home sleep testing, loved it. And then I stepped out and helped companies do government contracting and helped a dental oral appliance company. And then I found my way. It's a long story, but I was selling an acoustic rhinometer. And then that contract fell through. And so my daddy always said, if you keep, when I called him, he said, "Do what you love and make money at it." And I said, "Well, Dad, what I do, because I love this product." He said, "You know what you do, kid? You find the competition, you will go work for them and you kick their rear end." Okay. So I Googled it and I found this company who's actually the distributor of GM Instruments. So they go to Eric Gregg, at that time was the owner of GM Instruments, and said, "Hey, we've found this girl, ENT, critical care, flight nurse, industry background, clinical background." And Eric said, "Well, why don't I just talk to her and, get to know her?" And we had that conversation and he said, "Come work for us." So in 2017, that's when I brought acoustic rhinometry and rhinomanometry, four-phase rhinomanometry, over to the US, as well as the peak nasal inspiratory flow meter. And Dr. Rachel, at that time, here I was in clinical practice at that time for 25 years. And having been in the ENT industry, I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, what are we doing here? I've seen 8,000 cases and we haven't been measuring or quantifying the improvement of airflow through the nose. What are we doing? And then it was in 2018, I went back to home office, which was in Scotland. And I said to Eric, I said, "Y'all, we're doing this wrong. It's not structure. It's not how our face looks. It's not volume. It's function. How is air coming into the nose against the pressure gradients that we already have naturally affecting all of our vital functions?" And so I said, we need to flip the script. So in 2018, we completely flipped the script, focused on four-phase rhinomanometry, brought it into dentistry around 2018, orthodontics around 2020, chiropractic in 2021, physical therapy around that same time, and gradually got into different specialties. So when you look at the history of this, of quantifying objectively how we are breathing actively, sitting down and lying down, the technology and concepts, all they're old, way back in the 70s, they're relatively new to the market. So they always say it takes 12 years to adopt something new. We're halfway there. It's picking up. Um, but there is some market confusion as well. And to that end, when I went back to home office and trying to learn this, I said, "Well, what's normal? I mean, how do you know it's normal on these devices?" Well, as far as the peak nasal inspiratory flow meter and whatnot. And Eric said, "Well, we can't practice medicine. We don't know. We just can't teach people that." And I said, "Well, I'm licensed, so I'll do it." So I took that 5.5 years of research from 2017 up until 2022 and really just dove in and looked at tracing after tracing, measurement after measurement. And over 10 months, I created algorithms, processes, and methods, and then put that through the patent application, which is daunting, and created that. So it would look at the measurements, and it's called Daphne Score, Dafne score. And you can put that in, it goes to a cloud, and I can pull it down by office and take those measurements and look at them to see what works best and what patient population, gender, and as well as what they're on already. Well, bada bing, in 2022, unbeknownst to me, here I was writing airway AI, and I had no idea. I mean, it was kind of the new buzz. So that's kind of the whole story, hopefully in a few moments. But it's been quite a journey from the recovery room to where I am now. So between copyrights and
Mhm.
patents and trademarks and courses, I just put so much heart and soul into this because respectfully, we've just been doing it wrong in the medical community. What I learned in nurse practitioner school that first semester was do your exam, create a diagnosis, and give it a pill. And oh, you want to do a test? Well, if the test can't be addressed with the pill to cure the disease, then why do the test? Oh, right. Now we have insurance companies. What are they going to cover or not cover? And so now I questioned with a healthy dose of cynicism, I'm part of the problem. I think in healthcare provider, we can say we're part of the problem. But I looked at this and I thought, wait a minute. Are we given a pill to treat the disease or to address the symptoms that are creating compensation of the disease? And if you look
Mhm.
at the
Mhm.
numbers as far as lobbying in the pharmaceutical industry, we are controlled by the pharma industry. I mean, think about
Yeah.
it. Holy cow! If we can cure a disease or address a disease, think about it. They want to keep
Mhm.
us sick so they
Mhm.
have a little bit of a profit.
Mhm.
And to that end, I got so frustrated
Right.
that I wrote a book about it. So I thought,
Yes, you
let's just
did.
put a cherry on the top of this, and I wrote a book.
Yes. Yes. You know what? I love this so much because I feel like, this is centric on what we're talking
Mhm,
about, but you're hearing so much more about this in so many different spheres of medicine because there are so many different spheres
mhm.
of people having like these lightning bulb lights come on of like, oh my
Yes,
gosh, this is like, what are we
yes.
doing? And there's so many people in different spheres, and it's such an exciting time because it's like this veil is coming off and so many things are getting
Mhm.
exposed that it's like this is not true medicine and we're not doing no we're not actually not really doing it. And so it's a beautiful really time that as you're explaining this, and I want to talk about your book in just a second, but it's also awesome because so many people in so many different professions
Oh,
within the medical system are also doing those things.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it here so I'm gonna be a little disruptor here. We're so focused on nasal breathing. And there was this little meme
Mhm.
going around on social media that said, as like a dentist or in your case, like a chiropractor, here are some things I would tell you and hope I don't hurt your feelings. So here's
Yes.
some things I would say,
Okay.
and I hope they don't hurt anyone's feelings. But you hear nasal breathing, nasal breathing. Y'all, that's just so 1990s. It's not about nasal breathing, it's about nasal function. And I said this because respectfully,
Mhm.
function controls the breathing. Your function, your ability to do something will create that ability to breathe and pass air. And the other
Mhm.
one that just really, and I say this in the book, sleep disordered breathing. It's like fingernails on a chalkboard for me because in my world, sleep does not disorder our breathing. Our breathing disorders our sleep. But this doesn't happen at nighttime. So we're so hyper focused on that one third of the day. Look at the industry, billions of dollars in CPAP and home sleep testing and oximetry. I mean, the market is flooded. Now, the technology is good, don't get me wrong, but we've been hyper focused on sleep that we forgot about the two-thirds the other day. And that's why in the book I said it's not sleep disordered breathing, it's continuous disordered breathing because we don't carry a CPAP around during the day and we don't have sleep apnea during the day, do we? It's only at night. So, yeah, that's why I say it's kind of a healthy dose of cynicism to the industry. But it was really And what was
Yes.
really interesting in 1992 on NPR, Walter Cronkite. So those that are, am I a Gen Zer or baby boomer? We all remember Walter Cronkite from CBS News.
Mhm.
In 1992, he was on NPR doing an interview and he said, the healthcare system is not healthy, caring, or a system. And that was one of the epigraphs in the chapter of my book. I mean, really think about that.
Mhm.
It's not healthy,
Mhm.
it's
Mhm.
not caring, and it's really not a system. It's kind of it's kind of a disease management, if that's even a proper word, but it's like a disease coping environment.
Yeah, sick care. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think it's so true, actually my sisters are nurses. My mom was a nurse. I have lots of patients that are nurses too. You're a nurse. I think it's honestly like this nursing profession as well that are like this like stream in the medical field that are bringing up because you're like in the trenches. And you're like seeing these things that sometimes even the medical doctors aren't seeing because, they're doing their little specialty things.
Mhm.
And I really think nurses are having such a big impact right now. And a lot of them are speaking about these things and saying these things. And so
Mhm.
um, I love it. I think it's great. And speaking of your book, which is called Breathe Through Your Nose, Don't Pay Through It. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Yes, right there. If you are on video, you can see it. It's an amazing one. Um, and on one of your posts, you were like mentioning a release of another edition that you did. You made a statement saying, nasal dysfunction is worth more to the medical model than a healthy nose because if we can't breathe well, we will never sleep well. And if there's no motion of air, we lose the art of breathing and then we become a CDC statistic. So
Absolutely.
that ties into like basically what you're saying. Preach, sister. Of what you're saying is
Mhm.
like that whole model, you know? And I mean, this statement isn't necessarily unlike other aspects of healthcare. The whole system needs an overhaul, really. But so I'm not surprised that it kind of bleeds into this section as well.
Mm.
I haven't read your book yet. It's on my list.
Thank you.
So I don't know all the intricacies that you go
Mhm.
into regarding that, but I'd love to talk about that. And you state that every aspect of the healthcare industry has an impact on our nasal function and how we breathe. And I'm sure you'll go into like all of the aspects of that, but with that really massive statement and the systemic kind of impact of that, why do they specifically wait till someone can't breathe to help them breathe?
You must have read the beginning. That was in the first paragraph of the book. We have all this technology, we have all this knowledge, but yet we wait till someone can't breathe to help them breathe. I think that it's become a standard of care. We hear that often, the norm. And and in my world, introducing all of my concepts, I mean, that's why I pioneered flow-based dentistry, flow-based expansion, and flow-based orthodontics. Because we are essentially walking bubbles of pressure to trying to defy gravity. And when we look at this, we have to really like be aware of what's going on around us. So for example, in one of the chapters, I talk about the alphabet soup. Who are all of these people in the healthcare industry that are telling me what to do or not do? And the social media platforms are so flooded with information. Some good information, disinformation, misinformation. And the whole goal of the book was it's broken down into 4 parts. It's giving you the whole history and the dynamics of nasal function and how we breathe. How do we develop? Chapter 3, I talk about come fly with me, how flying in a plane is like nasal function. How do they come together? And then I go into the industry, the whole landscape of the healthcare industry. And I talk about the politics of breathing. Now, I'm not a political person, but I talk about the politics of breathing because you mentioned why are we kind of stuck in this mode? Is that we also not only do we have the medical device companies, the pharmaceutical companies that I talk about, we have the government agencies of the FDA, the CDC, the NIH, who gets a grant, who doesn't get a grant. But we have to go back to the insurance companies and these professional societies. Now, I think the professional societies are a wonderful aspect of the industry for continuing education. However, they influence our healthcare heavily. If you go into medical guidelines or clinical policy bulletins in these different insurance companies, when you go to the citations, you'll see how different societies like the AMA, the ANA, all these different organizations will say, well, we don't think that that's good or we don't think that's needed. And that's what's happened in my world. When I've gone to, for example, ENTs, and I've heard this, well, we don't really need it. And I've even heard it from dentists. We don't really need to measure airflow. And I'm like, yikes. But they'll say, well, that's not the way we do things. We're not going to change our ways. That's for research only. It's old and antiquated. And when you look at healthcare as a whole, the nose ENT is very compartmentalized. It's so compartmentalized in our system that we become territorial. And I go over each, that's part 3. I go over all these key players in nasal function, from myofunctional therapy to chiropractic to physical therapy to the dentistry portion of it, the medical portion of it, and explain like who are these different specialties. Then I get into the alphabet soup. Well, what's a DC? A doctor of chiropractic. Well, what's an APRN versus an RN? And what's a nurse practitioner, a clinical specialist? I mean, there's so many different levels that it's confusing. What's a resident? What's an intern? What's an attending? A lot of these patients get thrown into these teaching institutions. And I came from one at UNC Chapel Hill. And during my clinical rotation, I was over at Duke University in the Durham VA, and they offer a lot of great exposure. But there's just a conundrum of people. And you then, like when you have grand rounds or rounds in the morning, it's like here comes urology, here comes nephrology, here comes general, practitioners. Well, here comes general surgery, here comes, there's so many. It's like, and it's like, well, I'm Dr. Such and such, and I'm a resident. Well, I'm a fellow. Well, wait, what? And coming into this, I
Yes.
was that person. I had to figure out attending, fellow, resident, intern, student. And I felt
Mhm.
the need to really lay this out. But I also, again, a healthy dose of cynicism, I had to say, what's a patient advocate? We have all of these, what's a certification? What's board certification versus, well, you take a weekend course and now you're certified. It's so multifactorial that in the airway world, it'll make your head spin. I mean, it does me. And then you'll see people, well, I was self-taught. Well, self-taught doesn't make you an expert, but you play one on social media. So that's why I wrote the book. Let me guide you and say, this is the healthcare industry. These are all the aspects of it. And oh, by the way, part 4 is here are patient resources. Here's what's going on. Here's what's new in the industry. I talk about AI, but then I also talk about the history of rhinomanometry because the inventor of the computerized 4-phase rhinomanometry is Dr. Klaus Vaught. In January 2023, he found me on LinkedIn and he said, I'm the father of rhinomanometry. You're the VP at that time of GM. Don't you think we should work together? So we have some amazing things coming out. We have had, he and I have written 4 papers from our research in the ENT labs that we have. And it's just, we just want to be heard because it's so defining. Now he will be 90 next April. And bless his heart, he's so kind. He speaks very broken English, but it was such a compliment to him when he read my book and he said, "You are the future of rhino diagnostics." Rhino meaning nose.
Mhm.
And he was just
Yes.
elated. He read my Daphne paper, how do I do all this? And he just said, "I'm just so thrilled." Now, book number 2 is coming out in October.
Come
And
on.
that book,
Yes.
he wrote a forward message for me, as well as Dr. Dwayne Grummins. They
Okay.
said, can we please write a forward for you?" So book number 2 is called
Mhm.
The Nose Decoded: Unveiling 60 Nasal Functions That Affect Your Health.
Wow.
Essentially 60 chapters. And
Mhm.
I don't know what possessed me to do that. I think it's because everyone says, well, humidify, filter, and warm the air. I'm like, no, there's more to this. And then you've
Mhm.
heard,
Of
well,
course.
there's 30 functions of the nose. I'm like, don't tell me there's 30 functions. I'm gonna challenge you. And that's what I did. I mean, I was talking to Dr. Vaught, and he's in Germany. And it was a cold winter here in Maryland, and I just got out. I probably looked
Mhm.
crazy, but I just got my phone in the
Mhm.
notes section on your phone, and I just started talking to myself. I was like, "Okay,
Okay.
olfaction. Now let's break it down into subspecialties. Humidification, uh, taste and smell." I mean, here's a fun fact. We taste, we smell food when we inhale, and we taste when we exhale. And if you don't believe me,
Mm.
pinch your nose and see if you can taste your food. That's in the book. But
Very
yeah.
true.
So all
Yeah.
these little
Yes.
micro functions I broke down, and I had a lot of fun writing that. So that's coming out in October. And then I'm on book number 3 that'll be out next summer. That goes into all these different pressures in our body. And what is, when I said, we are walking bubbles of pressure trying to defy gravity. When you look at the pressure in
Mhm.
our lungs, our heart, our ears, our eyes, our nose. It's like,
Yes.
you
Everything is connected.
isn't it? Exactly, exactly.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, everything is connected, and in line with that, how you've been able to kind of make these
mhm.
connections with how intricate the nose is, um, what would be some I know this is probably a loaded question, but what would be some other aspects maybe, like, in the industry as far as, like, maybe cardiology and some other aspects, that play a role in nasal function?
That's a great question, because in 2012, when I was in the home sleep testing market at that time, we were we were hitting OBGYNs and cardiology. Now, what's interesting is that, like, in the cardiology world, we talk about heart rate variability and hypoxic burden. So heart rate variability is looking at the beats, like how well your heart is beating. And what's really interesting is that nasal resistance. Now, here's the key. This key biomarker that's in Daphne for interpretations and really understanding the body, that key biomarker is nasal resistance, specifically
Mhm.
inspiratory resistance. How well are we breathing in? Because that looks at oxygen uptake, intake, nitric oxide production, and things like that. Nitric oxide is always present in our nose, but when we inhale, it really enhances. Now, Dr. Nathan Bryan, I love following him, and I mention him in the book, and I talk about a little bit of nitric oxide. It's produced in our body, but we need that for vasodilation, and homeostasis. But in my world, I really look at heart rate variability. Now, when I work with pro athletes, they'll use like a heart rate variability tracker. And I'm not spooky, but I can look at the tracings. I don't know if it's my critical care nurse from looking at monitors, like intracranial pressure monitors and blood pressures, and look at all these different, waveforms, that I really had a knack for this. But I'll look at these heart rate variability tracings. What's really interesting is when you are congested, they drop. Now, in the athletic world, if that heart rate variability drops, the player is less responsive to stress and more at risk for injuries because they just don't think that quickly. And so, from a cardiology perspective, not only is it nitric oxide, is it a heart rate variability, but it goes into sleep as well because it's all over the internet, social media. They talk about heart disease, sleep apnea, and that's very true. And how you can think about this is we have we need a little bit of nasal resistance in our nose. So if anyone tells you breathe quietly and silently without resistance, they're lying to you. Because basically no resistance means that air is like right through your nose. We need to slow down so we can
Right.
filter and humidify this and warm it, right? Um, but when those flow limitations occur, airflow is getting slower, it alters the pressures in the back of our throat. And that's where the collapse comes into play. And when we respond and we get really hyped up, fight or flight, heart rate goes up, everything just goes bananas. And especially when we look at the breathing engines, as I call them, for the respiratory system, we have it in the brainstem, the medulla oblongata, and the pons. And that medulla oblongata not only does it look at breathing, but also blood pressure and heart rate. So you can see that connection just at the brainstem level and also swallowing. And that's why we see people with traumatic brain injuries where they might be drooling, they look kind of catatonic and they have a little bit of a drool because all this in the brainstem, when you look at a TBI or a traumatic brain injury, even a concussion, this was my favorite term in trauma.
Mm-hmm.
It's called a coup contra coup. The head goes forward and then the brain follows, and then impact and the head bounces back and the brain follows. So it's coup contra coup. And in that, the nerves get sheared and the brainstem gets jiggled. So what's really interesting in our research, we can look at, they look at heart rate and blood pressure, but it's like, well, wait a minute. Look at that history of head trauma, concussions. And this is where you do a lot of work in your field, working with these people, proprioception's off, balance is off, posture is off. And that's the beauty of it. So that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
like a really, it's like a dissertation, but that's a real in really deep explanation when it comes to cardiology. Flow, pressure, hyper responsive, heart rate goes up, blood pressure goes up, and over time, that chronicity of high blood pressure, high heart rate just really puts stress on the body and the whole vascular system. Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it makes sense. And I think it helps people listening, hopefully, to
Yeah.
understand what I'm doing by asking that question is the systemic, because we're talking about the nose primarily, but we're also talking about the systemic effects. And that's also what you mentioned in your book. And so I wanted to mention that in that question that there's other outliering things that also are impacted when this system is awry and the brainstem and the pons and all of that stuff. And so it can definitely be systemic, and you're seeing that in different fields of medicine, and they're not going back to this kind of sphere, which is super important.
Mhm.
I mean, I can even say from a neurological standpoint, you'd be surprised in just talking about the medical part how many medical doctors don't even know how, like, you're talking about trauma to the brain, but they don't even know how to do like a proper cranial nerve exam on someone after they've had a concussion or brain
Mhm.
injury. And I'm not even like an expert. I just know like basic
Mhm.
things to start, a little bit maybe more than basic, but it's wild to me because just that negligence, they're like, "Oh, you're fine after a concussion," but they did 0, testing like you're talking about. They didn't test the quality of their breathing, but also they just didn't test their neurological system. And
Mhm.
so there's so much negligence that can come from that. That's also very disheartening, but reasons that we do these things and we speak about these things And you also mentioned sleep apnea,
Mhm.
and which is also a big topic and pretty big epidemic too. And you said it's not just nighttime, right? Which is the thing. Um, and we talk about CPAP because that's really the only option that they have, right? But in talking about where you're talking about the function, um, and they give them a CPAP, that could actually be working against them if it's not treating the right thing. Can you explain
Yeah.
how that works?
Yeah, and that's why I kind of coined in the book CPAP intolerance at a certain level. So think of like with think of a spectrum with nasal resistance. There's a spectrum where we go from what we need therapeutically to off the chart where we need surgery to bring that resistance down. As we go up the chain of resistance levels, there's a very small window where CPAP does not work. And when you think about it, we're negative pressure breathers. We're not frogs on a lily pad that are positive pressure breathers, gasping for air. We're negative pressure breathers. And the more it increase that you get in resistance, the more increase you
Mm-hmm.
get of the interthoracic pressure, the negative pressures. Okay.
Mm.
So set
Mm-hmm.
that side. So we're
Mm-hmm.
negative pressure breathers,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
you have a positive pressure system. And it's almost like it's hitting a wall. You have high nasal resistance with air trying to blow into your nose. 85% of the air on a CPAP goes to the nose. If that nose doesn't work, what do? People will tape their mouth. Another conversation. They'll tape their mouth, they get cheek puffing, they get frustrated. And here's the thing is that I had a family member get a sleep study and sent it to me. I'm like, oh boy. And the neurologist said, we're going to put you on CPAP. And I said to that family member, it's never going to work. Well, how do you know? I do what's called like a facial analysis. I created this 3 years ago. It's called the Maverick Nasal Exam. I'm a military girl, so everything is an acronym to me. But each letter in Maverick means something. When I look at your face, I can tell what side of resistance, how bad it is. When I look at your posture. So I did Maverick. And what's really key is asymmetry. Now, we're all asymmetrical, and you see this in your practice. We're all asymmetrical to some degree. And 70% of us have a deviated septum to some degree. But that deviated septum can create posture compensation. So this particular person had a deviated septum, cervical spine stenosis, um, had scoliosis. So right there, we know that there's going to be compensation in the breathing. They're already, it's already going to be mouth breathing with high nasal resistance, even with a deviated septum, and allergic rhinitis, and the congestion was already present. So they did the CPAP for 3 weeks because I said it's never going to work, but you go ahead and you try it. 3 weeks later, it didn't work because that nasal resistance was so high that positive pressure air was just going against a brick wall. And I always say that an inflamed nose is the response to inflammation in the body. If you have inflammation in the nose, there's inflammation going on somewhere. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. You think that CPAP's going to work, but if that nasal resistance is too high at a certain level and you have CPAP intolerance, what do? I think, and again, that's why I like to see the nasal function tested. Where are we on that spectrum to know exactly what to do? And again, that's another reason why I wrote and created the Daphne Score software so that providers could see and learn what do all these pressure and flow readings mean. It's really important. It's going to dictate your care. It's not going to dictate your care, but it's going to monitor the care over time and even look at the stability of what you've done. So, for example, if you look at expansion, and there's different things and different data out there, but if you look at like palatal expansion in a child, like 3 years later, they're right back to where they were before they got expanded. Well, why? Because you hyper focused on this instead of looking at this, and this. Make sense?
It does make sense. Yeah. So
Mm.
with speaking about that, can you talk about the palatal expansion and its relationship to the nasal
Yeah.
function specifically then?
I love, love, love maxillary expansion. I use it in my son. Chapter 19 of the book, it's called Mama Bear, Be Your Own Voice. And I tell his story. We are a prescription society, so they think it's ADHD. And even when I worked in children's mental health, I worked with ADHD children. It was a under a federal grant. So we called them, I don't like this term, it was SED, severely emotionally disturbed kids. And my patient profile that I had and that I practiced with was ADHD, OCD, oppositional defiant, and also addictive tendencies. Back in the mid 90s, Rachel, we never looked at sleep and breathing in a child with ADHD. So I think, again, there are so many experts out there saying, oh, it's ADHD. There's more to ADHD than just a breathing airway issue. And expansion can work. Like I said, I'm a huge proponent of it. Zach went through it. Had he not done expansion, he would have been that proverbial child and another CDC statistic diagnosed with ADHD. And oh, yeah, a target on his back for the pharmaceutical companies. Um, so, w- the key thing with this is that volume does not equal function. Now, I know that's going to upset some people, but when you look at the nose, it's like a bridge, like a triangle. This area right here, and I just had this conversation with a world-renowned orthodontist, and he thought he was so happy because he went from 19 millimeters wide to 23 millimeters wide. He's like, "Look, Dr. Karen, I helped their breathing." I'm like, "So?" And he's like, "What do you mean so? Look at the volume. Volume does not correlate to function. Here's why. Remember, we need a little bit of airway resistance. As you expand the maxilla and you have a posterior deviated septum, that posterior deviated septum is going to follow the expansion. It can get worse, right? The other portion is when you look at the palatine bone and the palatine suture, like where it is. I sent this orthodontist kind of a cross-sectional view of it, and you can see where the expansion would really have an impact on that suture. But guess what? It doesn't address the front portion or the anterior portion of the nose. So although the expansion will help, we have to look at how you are creating flow because it's not the volume we want to look at, it's the functional airway aspect we want to look at. How is it going to function? Because you can overexpand somebody, and I can do rhinomanometry and look, woohoo, the nose looks patent, it looks good. But guess what? They're coming back and they're saying, well, my sleep is better, airway's better. Then they come back and they're like, oh gosh, my symptoms of upper airway resistance and sleep disorders are coming back. Why? And here's why. If you overexpand and you drop that resistance too far down, you will affect the velocity of the air coming in the nose. If that air is not slowed down, and let's back up a minute, 80% of airflow to the lungs comes through the nose. Over 50% of upper airway resistance occurs in the nose. And of that, two-thirds, 50%, a little more, occurs right here in the first 1 inch of your nose. So you can expand, 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 like, woohoo, I got great nasal volume. But if you drop that velocity to a point where it can't slow down, guess what? The body is smart enough to say, whoa, I can't let that air go into the lungs too fast because guess what happens? You can get like a cold air bronchospasm. That's why we never did CPR in the cold. Why are we going to manually ventilate cold air into someone's lungs? Everything just kind of constricts. I mean, when you go outside, what do? You go like this, right? That's what your body does as well. And so what happens is the body is smart enough to say, slow the air down. Well, guess where it gets slowed down? Between it's like in this area here, the pharyngeal area right here. Well, what happens when the body's in stress? It responds through inflammation. So you can look at a CBCT and go, oh, wow, it's a narrow area. Is it a narrow area because of structure or inflammation? So that's why you have to be really careful not to overexpand because you can create what's called, I don't know if it's a medical term, but I just made it up to this orthodontist. I'm like, this is pseudo-UARS. Pseudo meaning the volume looks good in the nose, but they've got sleep and airway, sleep symptoms, waking up, fragmented sleep, insomnia. Why? And here's the other thing too, and I talk about this in book number 2, in the humidification section of it. When we breathe right here, the relative humidity of our air at this point, like around the glottis area, is 95%, which is good before it goes into the lungs. What the air that goes through our nose before it enters our nose, that's about an 80% relative humidity. So we're going from 80% relative humidity to 95% relative humidity. You can see why that air has to slow down, go through the turbinates, get warm, get humidified before it reaches here in the back of our throat. When we mouth breathe, the air that comes into our mouth is 60% relative humidity. Now you can see why we have mouth drying, drying of the mouth and all those uncomfortable kind of feelings that we feel like we're dehydrated. So that's why when we expand, again, I love it, but we have to look at these airflows. We have to look at the pressure changes because you can expand till the cows come home, but if this nose is not fixed, it's still going to compensate. The body will compensate. And that's why I love myofunctional therapy with expansion. But here's the problem. When you look at the trigeminal nerve that really controls nasal function, it also dictates the genioglossus muscles, the 2 large muscles in our tongue. In the presence of nasal resistance, the tongue will never function efficiently. Never. It's neurologically impossible. And you can test it by opening your mouth and then sniff through your nose real quick. If you breathe through your nose real quick, the tongue automatically goes to the roof of your mouth. That's how you know your nose is working. The nose knows. Is that helpful? Is that a good explanation?
That was excellent. How would someone know, is it is there like a qualifying number, or how would someone know specifically, I guess, for them,
Mhm.
how much the expansion, like what is the limit that they're looking at? Because me, I'm kind of working with the orthodontist based on their body neurologically and stuff. But if someone, for instance, maybe didn't have that, what's like the qualifier of this is too much expansion versus not enough? Like how are you qualifying
Yeah,
that?
we test it with the 4-phase rhinomanometry. Remember, the
Okay.
biomarker is nasal resistance. Nasal resistance dictates swallowing, breathing, sleep, speech. It dictates so much, our posture. And here's the thing though, is that nasal resistance is very slow, very sneaky, and very insidious. And it's cumulative over time. So you think you're breathing well. I see it in my office. I breathe great. And I'm doing Maverick on that person. I'm doing a facial analysis of them. And I'm like, well, that's not what your face is telling me. So I kind of have in my mind what to anticipate before I even test them with 4-phase rhinomanometry. And there's a graphic and a chart. So a provider can do rhinomanometry. They can see the baseline. And I always follow the old ENT way of what we did in sleep apnea surgeries, is that we had a baseline sleep study, and then we would test them about 4 weeks post-op. So 1, 3, 6, and 12 months. And now I flipped it to say we're going to do rhinomanometry baseline. We're going to do 1 month of therapy and see how they're doing. And if they're doing RPE, I have them do it like weekly, because I've had cases where in 21 days, the nasal resistance went from complete obstruction to a normal range within 21 days. And I have the proof.
Wow.
So it can happen very quickly. So
Sure.
you really want to see how you're improving the flow against a pressure gradient that's creating resistance. And again, if you overexpand, you're gonna affect the velocity and the speed of that air coming in the nose. And it almost feels like they have empty nose
And
syndrome. Mhm.
sure. Yeah, I assume it would affect so much in how the brain functions and adapts to things, even probably proprioception and all of these different things if you don't,
Absolutely. Mhm.
if you don't carry that proper balance when you overdo things. So is that kind of the basis of what you've been, I'm assuming what you've been pioneering with this like flow-based
Exactly.
orthodontics,
Yeah.
excuse me, is doing these testings and screenings, and in combination with what they're doing, maybe with expansion or something else, and measuring through the entire process and making sure you're doing what that person needs in the scheme of their own body.
Exactly. And what's interesting, because again, the whole algorithm for acoustic rhinomanometry, and the peak nasal inspiratory flow meter, all the measurements, what to do, how
Mhm.
to collaborate are my trade secrets. That's what I created in the software. So those are all of my trade secrets. And it was kind of funny, not funny. It kind of put a little bee in my bonnet because I asked the source, I'm like, where'd you get that from? Because they said, well, zero point 0.2 to zero point 0.3 pascals is normal, and you want at least 300 centimeters cubed of of airflow. And I'm like, no, what? Who said that? Nasal resistance cannot be put in a box. When you look at Daphne and these algorithms that I wrote, I have almost 10 variables. So it's kind of like putting 10 variables in a cup, shaking it up, and just dropping on the ground to see what you come up with. And you have to piece these together. So we can't say zero point 0.2 to zero point 0.3 is normal, because that's not normal in a child. If I saw that in a child, I'm like, whoa, there we go again, overexpansion for that age. Now you're going to create pseudo-UARS. Now they're going to get back into sleep problems. And so you think you're doing well by them, but you're actually having a reverse effect. Same thing with mandibular positioning. Bring the mandible forward. And this is in the research. If you bring the mandible too much forward, you'll also have a reverse effect. So that's why I don't like these over the counter, mouth guards and things like that, because you can really have a reverse effect and impact your sleep and breathing. And it was in the research. You can do 1, 2, 3 millimeters of mandibular protrusion, bringing the jaw out. And that will drop your nasal resistance. Absolutely. At about 26%, somewhere in there. However, if you go 4, 5, 6 millimeters or 75% to a targeted protrusion, you'll increase nasal resistance. Excuse me, you'll increase nasal resistance by 43%.
Wow.
So
It's like worse
it
than
really
before.
is a science. I mean, it's not
Mhm.
it's not woo-woo, it's not hocus pocus. It really is a science to look at
Yes.
our pressure and our flow. And when you look at
Yeah.
sleep apnea, it's not a skinny pipe problem. It's a pressure flow relationship and how that pipe is responding to those pressure changes. Like when you go high altitude,
Mm.
barometric pressure drops, right? Well, that's kind of what happens in our body
Yes.
with resistance and flow and the pressures. So it's this little triad, this little
Mhm.
triangular love affair
Mhm.
that our bodies have in how we care for patients.
Yeah. Customization, right? We
Customization and
we strive
individualization. There we go.
exactly. We strive to help that
Mhm.
specific person with what they specifically need. Realistically, though, I mean, how many because, like, I mean, I've only found, like, maybe 1, there's probably more here, but I've only found 1, maybe 2 orthodontics that even know about what you're talking about. And so, I mean, realistically, I know that's part of your pioneering, call on your life, but realistically now, like, where are people at and how they're listening, how realistic is that for them to be able to go through that process of screening all of these things while they're doing that?
It is picking up in the orthodontic world. The message is getting out. I would say,
Mhm.
and again, I introduced this to orthodontists around 2020. It was around post-pandemic time. So when you all things considered, again, it takes 12 years for a new concept in medicine to really take hold. And if that's the
Yeah.
case, I've got till 2032 to get everybody on board. And
Mhm.
maybe I'll retire by then.
Yes.
Nah, who am I kidding? But we're about 5 years into this. And it's
Mhm.
programs like yours, platforms like yours that educate the public to go to these providers and say, "Look, I want this test. Call Dr. Karen. She'll
Yes.
teach you." And it's happening. I do have orthodontists that come to me and they're like, "Okay, you're like the global expert on this. Teach me. How do I do this?" And I'm
Yeah.
happy to do that.
Yes.
Mhm. It's expanded. I'm
Excellent.
on a
And is
few
there
yeah, I'm on a few speaker bureaus. Um, it is picking up,
ex
and that was another reason why I wrote the books. So the public knows it's there and can take the book and say, "Look, it's here. It's here. Learn it."
yes. Yeah, and I'm hoping by having these conversations, people are exposed and they say, even though you don't do this, this is I need this as part of my, treatment program. And so um how do people get these screenings? Like, do they just reach out to you to see who what type of providers, or how would they even search for
Yeah,
this?
and I do get frequent inquiries on social media, like on Instagram,
Mhm.
and people will message me and say,
Mhm.
"I just had somebody. Do you have somebody in Ontario?" I don't know offhand,
Mhm.
but let me check, and I'll see what I can do. And I keep a so I have a mental
Uh-huh.
list of who I've trained, who I trust, and it might even be an allergist. It doesn't necessarily have to be an orthodontist. See, that's our thing too.
Sure.
Is there an allergic component to this? So when people come to my office,
Yep.
and they do, they're like, "Can I come to your office and get measured?" Yeah. "Can I send you some pictures of my face? Can you tell me what's going on?" Sure. I can do that as well. Um, so, I mean, I had a family drive from Tennessee. They drove 6.5 hours just to get tested. 'Cause I didn't have anybody in Tennessee to do this. But I'm like, "Sure, you can drive
Mhm.
6.5
Mhm.
hours, have a little stay in Annapolis." I measured the whole family, all 3 kids and the parents. So it was a lot of fun. Even my pro athletes,
Awesome.
I do Zooms, and I'm like, "Well, I can't measure you, but I can look at you and know what's going on. Is your posture improving? Am I seeing the asymmetries
Mhm.
minimize with what you're doing?" But for the most part,
Mhm.
it's messaging through social media where they're asking me, "Where do I go? Do you know of somebody?" And again, the traction's picking up.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
mean, the machine, when you look at
Okay.
the cost relative to other instruments and devices, it's not any more expensive than a flexible scope that ENTs use and put up your nose with a camera and a light source to see what's happening in your nose. And I think, that
Mhm.
partnership, and I want to clarify this. There's a difference between a nasal assessment. You hear that word. Well, do a nasal assessment. A nasal assessment is what we see on the outside. And a pretty nose does not necessarily mean it's healthy on the inside. And so
Mhm.
if I suspect something, I always tell my folks, even on telemedicine, please go see an ENT because they'll do an actual nasal exam. The nasal exam is a scope, whether it's a rigid scope or a flexible scope and a light source, that they're actually sticking that up your nose with the camera and with a light source. That's an actual nasal exam. So there's a difference between assessment and exam.
Mhm.
I think that's so important because I've had cases of patients where they came back to me like, "Whoa, I have a polyp up my nose." Well, there you go. Let's get that out.
Yep.
Or they might do like a budesonide rinse or aerolization therapy, something to bring that down in size, and then you can breathe better. So
Mhm.
I think it's very,
Mhm.
I don't like the word multifactorial, but multi-layered. So we have a
Mhm.
structure, there's an allergy component. Is it food, mold exposure? So that's where a lot of like posture issues, cranial issues, do they need adjustment to come see you? Do they need allergy to look at them as well? Mold, I think that's more of a
Mhm.
functional medicine component. So I don't work alone, and I never will. I think it's selfish and I think it's
Mhm.
irresponsible. I will never work alone. But based on what I see,
Mhm.
I kind of like spawn out like spider legs. It's like, is it airway, chiropractic, craniopath, physical therapy? Who is going to help
Mhm.
me with this more holistic approach? Mhm.
Sure. You're like determining, well, this person has nasal resistance,
Mhm.
but what is the route to get that resistance, you know, balanced for that specific person? And what you're saying
Right.
is it could be multifactorial, right?
Mhm.
Or it could be something that is not just structure. Sometimes it may be just structure, but other times it's not. And so you're looking at who are the people that can integrate for this person and get them to where that resistance is balanced and key and the nose is able to breathe properly. Um, could you do like a quick spiel on why the mouth taping is
Ooh.
is is a touchy
Well,
thing?
there so there was a paper that came out. Do you recall
Mhm.
when that was? Wasn't it around the spring? Maybe the winter, I think it was, that was saying, "Don't mouth tape." Alright, so here's my opinion, not medical advice, but here's my opinion. I was curious,
Okay.
and Rachel, you were kind of, chuckling about my little stash in my corner, where I have companies that will send me products and say, "Hey, try this. Does it really work in the nose? Does it really help the nose?" And I love doing that. Um, but what was interesting is that I looked at 6 different brands and materials of mouth taping because I was curious to know when you look at the trigeminal nerve, it's almost like that hand on your face. It just covers your entire face, sensation, sensory type things, as well as nasal function. And the mandible, there's the V1, V2, V3. And V3 is only motor, the other 2 are sensory. So I was curious to know, V2 is up here on the lips, on the upper lip, and V3 is the lower lip. And I had this question in my mind thinking, what really happens with mouth tape? If you're stimulating the lips, you're basically stimulating V2 and V3. So what's that message go back to the brain and the nose, right? So I did a little study and I have all the data. I got to get the paper published. But I was the first to look at this using rhinomanometry. And guess what? I was shocked. There was one that was pretty good, one that was good, full mouth taping through the nervous system in a complete chaos. So I cringe. Yeah. And it was the VO2 tape. A little here with one. So I tell people, I'm like, if you are so determined to do this, eek. But if you have it in your mind, you're gonna do it. I have what is called my straw sip test. You have to be able to put the tape on and put a straw in your mouth because here's my concern, and this is just my nurse brain because I've seen some crazy things, is that if you get sick in the middle of the night or if you have drooling of saliva, I mean, I would be remiss not to say I worry about aspiration, you know? I mean, if you can't get that liquid out somehow, some way, that drool from, whatever the case may be, if there's a neurological issue, or if you feel sick in your sleep, or if you can't, I would say if your nose works, why are you full mouth taping? However, there's a caveat, is that if you've had sinus surgery and you've been a mouth breather for a long time, high nasal resistance gives you a weak lip seal. That is a fact. So if you get sinus surgery and you're trying to retrain the brain to nasal breathe and going through retraining of keeping your mouth closed, it does make sense. Do it during the day because you'll know your triggers. I can't do it because I'm claustrophobic. I can't. But I always say just a little piece vertically. So you have some motion. You can get air out. I don't want cheek puffing because I had a provider send me a picture and said, "What is happening?" It was nasal CPAP, full mouth taping, and cheek puffing. I'm like, high nasal resistance, air can't get in, get that thing off so they can open up their mouth and release that air because, like a plane with an emergency exit,
Mhm.
AKA the window or the door, we have an emergency
Mhm.
exit. It's biblical in Genesis. We were meant, God gave us, nostrils to give us life to breathe through our noses, right? Well, our emergency exit is the
Yes.
mouth. And I said in the book, we have an emergency exit like a plane. That's in chapter 3. Um, so I have mixed feelings. I think there's a place for it when you're
That
trying to retrain the brain to nasal breathe after being a mouth breather
yes.
and you want your lips stronger. There's a place for it. But during the day, it just
Mhm.
makes me so nervous. So that's why I'm like,
Yep.
I don't advise it because if something happened, I would
I get
feel
that.
horrible.
No, I completely get that.
What do you think? I mean, what are
Yeah,
your thoughts?
I get that. Well, my thoughts are, definitely case dependent.
Mhm.
I don't ever if I do recommend it, I don't ever recommend the full mouth. The only ones I've ever recommended are the ones that go around your lips and just kind of gently bring them together. However, now that you're bringing up about the trigeminal nerve, it makes me think about that. Like, are they overstimulating that nerve and can that have an effect somewhere else? So,
Yeah,
something I have to think about. But yeah,
yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of doing that, and I've always told my patients practice it first during the day because
Mhm,
you don't want to get into this panic
mhm.
or if you've never done it, get into this panic. And so, yeah, I think as with anything, use wisdom, and it's definitely caused me to think a little bit more about it, which is good. So thank you for
Yeah,
that.
I'm sorry to
And
sound like a negative
yeah,
Nelly.
no, you're
And no
not.
offense to those named
It's
Nelly,
just
but
I think part of pioneering is, you have to, like, navigate people with
Right.
wisdom about things, and I don't think you're being negative at all. I think you're not wanting people to go with trends and things that they're seeing, not that they can't help, but you wanna reel it back with wisdom because you don't wanna see them go these opposite ways, and so I don't feel that way at any time with what you're talking about. I think it's just wisdom, and I
Mhm.
think it's based, and I know it's based on research, and I know it's based on all of the education that you've done, and people don't really know that when they just see influencers posting all of these things. And airway has gotten a big boost the past, I would say, like 5 years, and we're
Yeah.
thankful. But also to put the light on that, we're very thankful. Um, it's just everything you take with wisdom when you get the media involvement. So I don't feel that way. I hope the listeners don't feel that way because you're just brilliant, and so we love you for that. And there's honestly so many more questions that I have, but we are out of time today. So I thank you so much for your
Mhm.
time. How can people find you? How can people find out about, this technology that you're talking about, the data? Maybe geek out a little bit more on your information. How do people find you?
So I'm gonna do more content, I promise. This has just been a little bit of a whirlwind. So many things happening that I kinda have to, like, move my pieces and parts. So Again, when I talk about the different societies and the politics of breathing, I got a little frustrated because nasal function was just not out there in the forefront like I wanted it to be, selfishly. So
Mhm.
I created the
Mhm.
International Society of Airway Function, Diagnostics, and Therapeutics. We're going to put more, I've
Okay.
got some, heavy hitters and great people that have partnered with me on my board as far as education. It's simply an education platform. So we'll be putting some content out there. Instagram, I'm at underscore the nose knows. So it's TheNoskNows. Um, I have a personal website that I'm going to have coming up where I'm going to do a lot of video education videos. And also, it's a lot of fun, but I'm a clinical director for intake as a consultant. So I'm starting to do
Yeah,
more educational
mhm.
things. The one we're going to talk about is pregnancy. So that's my first course that will be out to the public. Why is my nose stuffy? Why do I go to bed with a stuffy nose, or why am I waking up with a stuffy nose? And I hope you can have me back because I created like 5 pages of medication, herbs, and vitamins that, as a side effect, are causing nasal congestion. So it just might be your medicine that's causing the congestion as well. Um, and I talk about that in the book. What is your medicine cabinet telling you? I do have a post about that as well. I talk about menopause, perimenopause. Low testosterone can be a problem. So we have a hormonal shift. We've got medications. There's so many different layers to peel back. We just can't say, well, it's your posture. Well, because it all goes back to this little tiny reactive organ, the nose. I think the nose needs to be called its own organ. I really do. Um, but those are the few. Again, I'll have my personal website coming up as well. So I have a little link tree on my Instagram page where there's a few of my favorites and things I like that might help people. They're just simple over the counter things to help them as far as elevating your head, um, my opinions on nasal rinsing and nasal lavage. That's a whole other conversation. Also on LinkedIn, I do have links. I have 23 publications. So I have on LinkedIn all of those hyperlinks to those publications, but also email. You can email me and ask me, can you send me this paper? Sure. Or can you ask me a question? So you can reach me on email at Karen, Karen, at fact, FACTHCG.com. And that's also on my Instagram page as well.
Amazing.
You can, message me, DM me,
Yeah,
email me. Yeah. I'm pretty accessible.
we'll put all your
Yeah.
information we'll put all your information in your bio so that people can find you. If they're, in your car driving, don't drive off the road.
Yeah.
We'll put it in the bio for you so you can write it down. And I was actually going to say we definitely have to have you back because I have a whole list of more
Oh my goodness.
questions. So,
Okay.
um, thank you so much again. I'm truly honored and so thankful. And thank you everyone for listening. And we will catch you all on the next episode.